for being here. We're gonna have a conversation with this great group of folks about a day in the life of a Broadway show. Like, we're looking at what it takes to make a show happen and what life is like for the people who make it happen each and every day. Almost always 8 times a week, sometimes more, or holidays. And to talk us through it, we've got 4 of the folks you've seen on board the whole time. We have 2 of our Tony-winning actors who you all know, Doyle and we have conductor Annbritt duChateau, music coordinator, also guitar player Michael Ahrens. Hi y'all, thanks for being here. Before we talk about what the day-to-day is when you're in a show, I thought we could talk about what your day-to-day is when you're not in a show, because, you know, you are often between gigs. Broadway is an up and down kind of scene. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about kind of what that day-to-day actor or music coordinator life is, or conductor life is, when you're on the hunt for a new job and looking for a new job and developing stuff. So, like, Matt, it looks like you.
Oh yeah. No, definitely. Oh, especially because that's where I am right now. I'm in between gigs while I'm waiting for Sinatra to start back up, and yeah, thank you. And it's a really bizarre experience because you go from being 150 miles per hour, which is the Broadway schedule, to all of a sudden having just all the time in the world, and you have to fill that time. And you're chasing ways to fill that time, and you're trying to create a schedule for yourself. And I know that I'm like work obsessed and addicted, so I really have to make sure I create a schedule, otherwise I go insane and get depressed and all the things and get anxious. So it's about saying yes to, you know, all the things that I can possibly say yes to, a lot of new works and a lot of new workshops and projects to kind of cultivate and check out and see what I think of them, and if they have a life, you know, ahead of them, but also make sure that I fill the schedule with other activities and hobbies and keep my sanity that way.
Yeah, and I imagine that sort of day-to-day when you're between gigs changes a lot as your career progresses. Like, I imagine earlier in your career, for instance, like, it was all about auditioning and, you know, EPAs and all that stuff. Like, but
there certainly weren't Broadway cruises early in my career. Yeah. This is a perk.
Christian, what do you remember about that sort of auditioning time?
There was a huge difference, that's true. And like, I moved to the city in 1995, and we still had phone services there. This was pre-cell phone, obviously. So 212-946-1087 is the number that I would call incessantly, like every half hour. And if it rang, then you didn't have a message, and if it didn't ring, then you had a possibility. And so it was very thrilling times. And also just like going to 8th Avenue and getting your headshot reproduced, which were always in black and white and never in landscape, and now everything's changed. And I refuse to change with the times.
Do you still have solid copies of your headshot?
Yes.
And sometimes you end up working on, particularly now as you're developing new projects, projects don't always go anywhere. Matt, you talked about Diner the other day. But we were talking backstage about Magic Mike, which Annbritt also worked on. So please, both of you tell us some stories about working on Magic Mike.
Which I thought we weren't talking about Magic Mike.
Annbritt and I we would make eye contact a lot in rehearsal and just sort of look at each other like,
what's happening?
What is happening? What is happening? I was Ken Doll. Mm-hmm. I managed a body role.
Cheyenne was in it.
Cheyenne was in it and had this unbelievable opening number. And yes, the big, I think 11 o'clock number was called Stick It In. So that happened. And there was a point where, like, to prove to, I shouldn't be saying such horrible things. There was a point to prove to his dad that he could be a stripper or a dancer and make money that way. He stripped for his dad, and it was serious. And his dad was like, "You go get him, son." And we were like, "This doesn't work."
That being said, Tom Kitt does not write a bad tune.
No.
So like the music was amazing.
Yes, it was great.
That's all I'll say.
Stick it in.
And so, well, Michael and Annbritt, tell us about, you know, we have lore in our heads. We can sort of understand the like day-to-day of a young actor trying to make it. But what's it like for musicians? What is the equivalent of, you know, this community that you go out and connect with to try and get your next gig?
Can I talk for 60 seconds?
I'll give you my Reader's Digest. So I was finishing a degree at Northwestern in piano. Finishing, I didn't finish it. I did an undergrad and master's at DePaul University in Chicago. I'm a Chicago person. And weirdly ended up at Northwestern, and it was piano performance and pedagogy, you know. And I was gonna be a concert pianist. That's what I had never done, well, except for school stuff, never done any musical theater, any theater. And I got a call one day from a friend who was doing the ALW tours at the time. Said, I'm out of town, I gave him your name, you have to do this show that's coming in. It's legit classical piano. I told them they can only hire you, and I'm like, oh, okay. So the short version is, it was Aspects of Love. It was a Livent tour. Leading lady Linda Balgord just passed away. It was an amazing experience, and one thing that happened during that tour was Sir brought Sarah Brightman into the cast. So like I had, and also they needed a conductor, an associate conductor when somebody left, and I said, well, how hard could that be? Because I was 24, 25, you know, I was serious, and then I found out. But I mean, that's how it all happened, and since then, it's just kind of been being introduced to people, word of mouth. It's like out in the business world, it's networking, but I don't feel like you just meet people along the way. Is that how
Yeah, I mean, you know, my experience, was I moved to New York in '94. I'm a guitarist, so I went to school, Manhattan School of Music, for jazz guitar. And I played other things, but Broadway was like the furthest thing from my mind at that time. And I went through it. Afterwards, after I graduated, I wanted to play jazz and play in the clubs in New York. And when I graduated, I realized, like, well, there are no clubs that I can play at, and this is not a living that I can make, even though I love it. And I got some other gigs and some other tours, and like Britt said, meeting people and networking and meet people on gigs, just kind of the New York musician scene. And I was on tour with Liza Minnelli in 2002, and I met the bass player there, and he was playing on The Lion King. And I had no idea how Broadway worked, and I had no idea what an orchestra pit musician did, or how the schedule worked, how many shows you have to do. And I was asking him these questions, and he said, when we get back to the States, I'll introduce you to the guitar player, and when he subs out, maybe you can sub for him. And so that was in like 2002. So again, networking, and once I played, it went well, and I got to know the conductor, who was Joe Church at the time, and I was in all the time, and then that led to Wicked, and I started subbing there, and I just became this guitar player around town that people, called to sub. Then I started getting my own shows, because I met composers, so, did workshops and other readings of shows, and just kind of worked my way into the ecosystem, into the Broadway community. But at the same time, I was still a musician who got up and practiced and worked out things and transcribed guitar solos and stuff. So that's my life as a guitar player, way before the music coordination stuff.
Which is what, actually, for folks who might not know what music coordination is, tell us about that.
So, it's a very different, how I entered it was I had a mentor, his name is Michael Keller, and he music coordinated a lot of shows, and what that is basically the person who hires the orchestra. They work with a composer or a music director or supervisor, and then management. They're a liaison between management and the producers and the musicians, and which is also the musicians union. So there's, they work for the producers, but they are a liaison that helps the production be compliant with the rules, and how many musicians can you hire, and what do they get paid, and when do they get paid, and all of that. So hiring the band, basically, and that's the fun part, so sometimes. But then, working out the schedule, working out when they get into the theater, where they're gonna sit in the pit, all of the equipment, where does it go, what is needed, tuning the piano, scheduling orchestra rehearsals, cast rehearsals, when you start to interface the musicians with the cast and the singers. So it's really, you know, it's bridging the music side of things, which are really kind of independent up until the point they get into the theater. And then once the show's running, hopefully long, it's like maintaining that, you know, and maintaining, you know, stability. And then when people start subbing out, like I did when I started, you know, overseeing who it is and are they allowed back in the show? How are they playing? And working with the music director or supervisor to like trade notes and be on the same page. So it's complicated, yes. Yeah, a lot to do.
All right, so good news for all of you. Christian, you called your service. You got the no ring, or the good news. You all have a Broadway show. Yeah, you all got it. And so that's when you start rehearsals. Yeah. And so for a lot of actors I know, they really love the rehearsal process. Is that true of the both of you as well?
Yeah, I love it, especially because I really like being, I'm the kind of person that when I wake up, I need to be drained by the end of the day, by the time my head hits the pillow. And I'm one of the weird actors that like loves tech, because I love being, you know, there for 12 hours and watch people start to lose it, because that's when the personalities actually come out, and that's where like the best stories of all shows happen, because people are just so loopy at the end of the night and so delirious. And I feel like that's when the cast, for the first time, really starts to form their family connection, is during tech, because everybody just gets to see, all right, the guards are down, and you just see everyone's true colors, for better or worse, and it's just always hilarious, and a bit of a nightmare, but in the best way.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
There's been like a shift recently of people not wanting to do a lot of 10 out of 12s, and it is the most fun. It's when you get to the theater. Did I get it? It's when you get to the theater and everyone like gets their little nooks and crannies, and it's when you separate from the creative team, and it gives you a little bit of distance, and they're in their world in the dark, and you're backstage, and it kind of feels like a secret little land, and you're, you know, all these incredible Broadway theaters, you're just seeing how they all work and smelling the dust, and but I do not want that to change. I don't want less 10 out of 12s. Not only do they need that time to tech a show, I mean, it's just impossible to put up a Broadway show without that time, but yeah, it's the most fun. I like watching people go. A 10 out of 12 is 10 hours out of 12. That's it.
Yeah. So you have 2 hour-long breaks usually during the day, but you're there from essentially 11 to 11 or noon to midnight. So
It shifts, because when you're in rehearsal before you're in the theater, it's usually like a 10 to 6 day.
Yeah, right.
And so it's the first time where you don't get called in the morning, and you get to, you know, it feels like you get to sleep in for the first time, and you know.
They're long days.
I will say too, conversely, even though I like the long tech process, rehearsals for me is always 1 hour too long. So going 10 to 6, there's that hour between 5 and 6 where it's
a witching hour.
You're just, nobody has the energy or the bandwidth anymore. And when I did Little Shop of Horrors on Broadway, Michael Mayer is a staunch believer in what we call straight sixes, which is, instead of going from 10 to 6 with an hour lunch, you get together at like 11, and you have like a 20-minute break for lunch in the middle of the day, and then you're done at like 4:30, 5 o'clock, and that is the most sane rehearsal schedule I've ever been on, human.
And you're awake, and it's reasonable.
Yes. And that's just about sort of, because it's so creatively draining to be doing that for as long as it's like the closest thing you have to a 9 to 5 schedule as an actor, right? It was that during the rehearsal process, right? Yeah. And then, Annbritt and Michael, tell us, at what point do you get involved in a project, and how are you interwoven into the rehearsal process?
I mean, for me, usually I get brought in later. You know, the show is cast. They usually have a music director already. The production will already have, or the composer will have already selected someone like Britt. And there's a discussion about who is going to be the music coordinator. They start thinking about the orchestra. How big is it? what is the orchestration, are we gonna have horns, are we gonna have, is it rhythm section? So once the discussion about the music and the orchestration is settled, that's when they start thinking about who's gonna then take that and work out the rest for the orchestra. So I would say early, but definitely way before the orchestra's hired, but not before a music director usually. Rarely they'll call a music coordinator to hire a music director. Yeah.
And then, Annbritt, at what point are you?
Well, going back to, a lot of it starts with doing a reading. And a lot of people, well, Sound Like It Hot's a great example because you were with it
5 years.
right,
Yeah.
5 years. So sometimes it starts then. I just recently did a reading with Carrie Butler a few weeks ago, was it? I don't know. But, and Susan Stroman was a director. And so you think about, and it was for a show that the Bandstand guys wrote, Richard Oberacker and Rob Taylor. That was the first one. And so it takes years and years to move it forward. I've been introduced to people, and like Some Like It Hot, I joined late in the game. And sometimes I'm there for all the rehearsals, and so it just depends on when you get brought into the party.
Yeah, and are you in the room with the actors when they're rehearsing?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah. Usually the way the rehearsal process starts is you have your big meet and greet the first day, and everybody says hi, and they're all excited, and then it's like, go grab your score.
Yeah.
And then the first couple days is just learning the music and getting that down and trying to put the fear of God of the actors to learn it immediately so that they, can get on their feet and do everything that the choreographer wants or the director wants. So it's, it's a process, and then you kind of put it all together and you really don't revisit the music. Well, you're doing the music, but you don't really come back to rehearse things until later. A few weeks later.
How angry do you get when you're teaching music and actors are on their phones?
Wait a minute, you were on your phone? No.
How many?
I mean, first of all, it's 2024, so I would assume that people are recording for that. They know better than to mess with me, Christian.
I know. It's an epidemic. It's a real problem. I daydream about creating, a company or something where the policy is like, just put your phone away for the day. Like, you'll have a lunch break, put it away. But it's so staggering to sit in a rehearsal room and have people on the sides on their phone. I've learned so much from watching other people in every department, watching and learning from people. And we're suddenly in a place where everybody is just head down and scrolling. And sometimes I see what they're looking at. I'm like, that's just a person making a face at the camera for 5 minutes straight. And you find that more interesting than what's happening over there? It boggles the mind.
So I'm at Aladdin right now, and I started with it, and then I did a few things in between, and I've just recently returned. But Casey Nicola, first day of rehearsal, said to us 10 years ago, said to the cast, in the olden days, the shows I was in, first of all, he was didn't have phones, but he was it was mandatory for the company to stay in the room for all the rehearsals to watch, so that you understood how your thing connects with what's coming behind you and what's going after you. And he told the cast, and therefore we will have no phones, so that you can focus. And Michael Brandage for Frozen was the same way. He used to freak out because, the music department, you're changing music and you had to have your computer up. And he'd be like, what are you doing? But it was the same feeling. I had to honor what he was trying to do. So, yeah, phones, boo.
You don't even have social media, right?
I do not!
Yeah!
Thanks for bringing that up.
You're so cool.
It's only the end of civilization, but it's no big deal.
Actually, let me go back to Annbritt, something you said that the music department is like changing music in rehearsal and things like that. Are you involved in that at that time, Michael? Are you anywhere in that room and involved
in the cast rehearsal process?
Yeah.
I usually by that point I'm running payroll for the musicians involved with the process at that time. If it's pre-Broadway, if they're in cast rehearsals getting ready for a production. Or I'll be handling what equipment is there, what keyboards are there, and the scheduling. Sometimes people have conflicts, so we'll need to get a different rehearsal pianist in there, or a drummer. So yeah, there's things to be involved in at that time.
Right. Yeah. And then there is the moment where the cast performs with the orchestra for the first time.
Sitz Probe.
Called the Sitz Probe. Let's talk about the Sitz Probe. Tell us about it. Annbritt,
It's
do you
the
wanna talk
best
about it?
day
It's the
of
best day.
the
People love it. Tell us
whole
why. Well, first of all, Sitzprobe is a German word which comes from, do you know? I don't know.
Come on, Britt.
So this is the probe.
Well, there are two. There's a Sitzprobe and there's a Wandelprobe.
Wandelprobe,
And the
wait.
Wandelprobe is when you wander around during the process, and the Sitzprobe is when you sitz during the process.
Yeah, Borle. You're the one with the German accent.
The probing part, I'm not touching the
But honestly, it truly is the best day because it's often the first time that the orchestra meets the cast and gets to see them face to face, and it's often the last time you see the people face to face, just because of the nature of us being in the pit or being above or wherever. Sometimes you're fortunate to see people around the theater a lot, but sometimes you're separated.
Become separated.
Yeah. It's a really special time for the actors to actually have a connection with the musicians too, and have that face-to-face and be in the room with them on that kind of personal level, because once you get to the stage, it's really separate, and you're just crossing each other underneath the theater like, hey man, it's very, very quick.
And a lot of times you'll have the cast rehearsing for what could be months, with a piano, maybe drums, and learning the show and running the show a certain way. And then you have, and maybe they're referencing some demos or something from the composer, but other than that, they haven't really heard the full orchestration. So now you have an orchestrator who's writing for an 18 or 19 piece orchestra, and then when it gets time to rehearse the orchestra, they'll be at a rehearsal space completely separate, rehearsing that orchestra, and then the Sitzprobe comes together, usually the last service before everyone goes into the theater. So it's kind of the first time, and at least from the musician standpoint, we don't know how the show goes. Only the music part, we come in from that side. So we don't, hear the lyrics or even the melodies until the actors come in. So it's special for the musicians. And then everyone gets into the theater, and it becomes separated some ways again, because you have audio things to consider, like everyone is in ears, so you're only hearing your own mix of what you want to hear, and the actors are way over there, and they have their stage monitor. So there's a sound component to it too, and as well as being physically separated.
So if you have an actor in the show that has a particularly nasal voice, you can just turn them down?
You can turn them off.
We have a singer's fader.
I would never do that. But you can.
But the Sitzprobe is really special. I remember with Sinatra, we just had piano in the room for 4 weeks, and then we went into the room, and I'm sure you felt the same way, especially with Some Like It Hot. We went into the room, and it's just Nelson Riddle arrangements with 20 pieces all of a sudden, and the entire cast just wept. We had not heard it that way and didn't know really what to expect, especially with some new arrangements, and it's so emotional, and it's so exciting to know this is what we're actually doing, and this is when it really starts to come together. So it's a day that almost ushers in the actual production.
It's usually incredibly emotional. And it's also kind of like the last pure hopeful moment where you're all in this thing together and you've all drunk the Kool-Aid, because you have to believe in the thing that you're doing, and it's before you get into tech, or 10 out of 12 as we call it. And then it's before people start coming and judging and posting, and so there's a purity to it and a camaraderie, and it's beautiful.
And that sense of magic is, I am rarely invited into the process at that point, but I was writing a story about the SpongeBob musical when it was in Chicago, and so I sat in for a couple of hours of the sitz probe there, and you could feel that magic. Like everyone was so in love with each other, and like so thrilled to be hearing these songs that they'd all been doing in their own little corners all come together, and to hear it all come together. It's like, I see what they're all talking about. It really is genuinely magical. And then you hit the tech, which you love, which Matt loves, we hear. And then how do you get through that? How do you power through it as
Candy.
actors?
Candy.
A lot of sugar and caffeine, yeah.
Do you like the process? Do you like tech, Christian?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I love it.
Is
It's
it
really,
really?
really special. And it is a particular bonding time, and it's also like figuring out, you've been doing it in a rehearsal room. There's a line that marks the end of the stage with numbers starting at 0 all the way up to 12, or at the St. Louis Muni all the way up to 50 on each side.
Oh my God, do that in July. Is that what they do?
What?
Oh, yeah, numbers,
It's
yeah.
0 to 50 on each side.
Wait,
Have
in
you
July?
not-
What are you doing in
going
July,
to
Annbritt?
What are you doing?
Little Mermaid.
Look at this stuff. It is so magical. You're gonna love it. People call it's like camp, and it is. Oh my God, the feeling that it engenders. But anyway, so you get to the stage, and you're used to the rehearsal room, and suddenly, like, you see the numbers on the stage, and then an immediate drop off into the pit, which is somewhat harrowing. But yeah, that's when we make it our own, and that's when you see what people are really made of, right?
Yeah. I always get sad going home during tech. I'm ready to party. But then there's like that one day at the end of the week where you're like, I gotta go home. But I mean, a lot of sleep gets you through tech. I mean, you use the next day to sleep in all the way until rehearsal starts usually. Yeah.
And then what's tech like for the music department? How were you?
Well, usually it's piano drums in the theater until everybody joins. And it's kind of, sad when you're in front of it and you're seeing it and you're part of it, and then you move down below, and that's kind of when the separation sort of becomes, it's like, oh, okay, we're not going to see it all this time. Except I always demand a monitor so I can see the show during lunch, if I'm way underneath. But it's what they have said, and it's a time of being flexible and being open to changing stuff that needs to be changed, because that's what tech and previews is for. So.
Go ahead. Were you about to say something, Michael? Should look at you.
I was thinking, I was going to say what I was thinking, which was that sometimes tech, when the whole orchestra is in the pit, can be really long and exhausting, because especially if a show isn't, at least what I'm thinking, is in trouble. So like you have the whole orchestra in there, and maybe the tech is going from, in the afternoon, and then the orchestra will come in from like a 6:30 to 9:30 or 7 to 10 at night during tech. And we're all just sitting there, and we're playing like 8 bars for 2 hours, and you hear some director screaming about something, and then we're paused, and then there's all this stuff, and then the next day is more of the same thing, and then they say, oh, we don't need the orchestra. Oh yes, no, now we need them all day. So it's like, that is a much different process than a Vondelprobe, where the first time the orchestra comes in, we're now running the show, and then there's like maybe 1 or 2 calls in the evening until preview. So, yeah.
Can you be more specific about the shows you've done that were in trouble?
We don't have
You
time.
don't
Gotcha.
actually
Well, now we're moving into the part where you start previews, and so you're doing preview performances pre-opening for audiences, but you are often rehearsing during the day, which is a different kind of exhausting for all of you. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
It's kind of like tech.
Yeah, a little bit, but harder. Because you're doing the show at night, and you're starting to get emotionally attached to your material or what you're putting out there, and so if you have a sudden change, you're dealing with that on an emotional level, but you're also trying to memorize it by the evening show, or sometimes by the next day. If it's like a brand new song, they're like, don't worry, we're not doing this tonight, we're doing it tomorrow. So it's very, very stressful, especially because you know that you're still throwing things at the wall and you're still listening to audience response, and that's when you realize that it's no longer this safe thing that you've had in your rehearsal space, but it's it's now being judged, as it should be. We're trying to make it better, and we're listening to the third character, which is the audience, but it no longer feels like it's yours. It becomes everyone else's, and that's a hard thing to, I think, figure out and adjust to.
Yeah. And I always imagine that it must be super duper hard for those moments when you're rehearsing things during the day for changes that you're not going to put in until like 3 nights later. Like, I can't even imagine how.
Oh yeah, especially when they're great changes and you want to like tell the audience like, don't worry, this is gonna change. And you still have to do it 3 more times, and you're like, but I don't watch this part.
Do you recall any particularly chaotic moments in
Oh,
shows?
there was a lot of choreography in the company revival, and there was a lot that was cut. So we'd be doing choreography still and be told like, but all of this will be gone in 2 days. And so you see like Patty in heels running across the stage still, like, when the hell am I gonna cut this? And she was right. Yeah.
Christian, what about for you?
There was an amazing moment in Spamalot out of town. We were in Chicago, and it was such a special time. We were all just watching Mike Nichols direct, which was one of the greatest joys of my life and such an incredible learning experience. And the show was we did the first night in Chicago, and it was already working. And it was like, we didn't know at that point if it would work. And so it was so exciting. And so then it just became about fine-tuning it. And Sada Ramirez, who won the Tony for her performance as the Lady of the Lake, she has in the show, as it opened, 5 numbers, all completely different styles. But she had a 6th number at the end of the first act in which she sang a French torch song as the cow. So the cow that gets launched out over the castle. Before that happened, she came out in like and it was like an Edith Piaf type style number, and she was in this like cow print incredible dress that they made for her, and she sang an amazing song that was kind of everyone's favorite song of hers in the show. And Mike Nichols, being the mathematician and the artist that he is, and it was his favorite number, realized that it had to be cut just because it was throwing off the rhythm of the show. And so it was his famous thing saying, you have to kill your babies. And so it was his favorite baby. We came in and he said, I can't believe I'm telling you this. We're gonna see her do it one more time and then it's cut. And we were all just like, we could not believe it. And she was so amazing about it. And so yeah, so we never actually saw the cow sing. It just got launched over the castle.
Do you remember any of that song?
I don't.
Liar.
Nice try.
And for the music department, what's going on? Because as all this music, like dance arrangements change, dances get cut, all that stuff. Right?
Well, I was just sitting here thinking, like, is there a show I've done where anything? Okay, I'm conducting Aladdin, so we went out of town, Toronto.
Were you within a Toronto? Yeah, it was a different show then.
It's a completely different show. I mean, and in that show, if you didn't know, Aladdin's 3 best friends were the narrators, told the story the whole way. So like there would be, like the opening bit happens and the 3 friends come out and they sang Arabian Nights and then everybody else joined, you know. But there was no introduction of everybody. And every time they sang something, it was a different style of music. So Michael Cosrin is Alan Menken's right hand man. He's brilliant. So he comes up with all these arrangements, all these styles, and it was super fun. But it was not working. And at the end of the Toronto run, creatives came back and Casey said to me, he's like, yeah, you know how you there's 3 weeks off when we get back? You don't have 3 weeks off. And so that's when they changed everything, and that's when they took the 3 best friends stuff away. That was a sad day. But you know, the Genie opens the show and he introduced all the characters, and now March 20th is the 10-year anniversary. So clearly they did something right. But it was a big, you know, it was a lot.
Learning and unlearning new music all the time. Yeah. And then Michael, how are you coping with all those changes?
I think that when you get to the larger orchestra, when there's cuts to a show, it doesn't really affect them as so much because, you know, if they're happening in the moment, the music director or orchestrator will say, cut these measures, they'll mark it in their parts, and that may go on for a week or so during tech, and then it is, at a certain point, the copyist copies all the music, will take all the changes, and there's some communication going on in the music department about what bars are being cut, when are we doing it, when are we implementing this, or if there's additions, like we're inserting this moment into a song. All of that happens and the jigsaw puzzle takes place, and then there's a date usually where we're gonna print the music and then everybody in the orchestra becomes aware of this new version of the show. So there's a whole process that happens that the musicians aren't really involved in until it like is on their stands, I would say.
Yeah. And then the show opens, reviews are great, the advance is huge, it's a big hit. What's your day like? Tell me about what's you get up in the morning, you've got a week of 8 shows ahead of you. What is your day-to-day life?
Oh man, I would say it depends on the role, for sure. I mean, with something where you don't leave the stage or something, I'm not like a natural tenor at all, so when I was doing Elder Price, I couldn't drink because if I had one drink, I could not sing, I believe, that night. So it was like a year of sobriety and just like taking care of my body like a monk, you know, and going to sleep, and sometimes you have that kind of rigorous role that requires you to literally just have PT all day and wake up and almost like work your body like it's an instrument that you need to take care of. And other times, you know, you have one big song and you get to enjoy life a little bit more and socialize a little bit more, but you are still always taking care of yourself, I think. And that's the biggest thing is for me, it's mental and physical fitness, just making sure that I always feel prepared and ready to go and warm for the show.
And are you out late often? Does it depend on the role also in terms of like what like?
I'm so socially awkward that I'm a big nerd, so I like to just go home and play video games until I fall asleep. That's me.
What are you playing now?
What am I playing right now?
Yeah.
Oh well, I was just.
Is that what I sound like?
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop drinking coffee. But what are you playing right? What are you playing right now?
Oh. Well, Christian, something that I was scrolling on my phone. Right now I'm playing Valheim. Do you play Valheim on PC? Yeah. Oh yeah, we got some Valheim friends. Yeah, it's like a survival Viking game. It's really great. It was just a member playing it.
I was just playing Prince of Persia on the Switch.
Oh yeah, so good. So good. It's great.
Is that a thing you do when in a show too? Just gaming?
Yeah.
Christian and I are both big nerds. Christian's a huge comic book nerd.
Comic books.
Yeah.
No, things changed after the shutdown, to be sure, in terms of socializing after the show, because New York still has not bounced back completely. It's in great shape. It really has made leaps and bounds. But like, you know, you could go out and kitchens and restaurants would be open until past midnight. And now it really is hard to find anything open at that. So it has made, I think everyone's become a little bit more of a homebody.
Are you a late riser or early riser? Like when you're in a show, like are you rolling out of bed at 8, 10?
No, yeah.
Like what's that?
That's the second one. But it's, you know, it's different for matinee days and all that. But I was the part of doing theater that I love is I am. Maybe you see it in my bio. My father was Swiss. I don't know why my father's in my bio, but anyways, he was Swiss, and I developed a lot of Swiss tendencies. So I like everything structured and regimented. So there's the 8 show a week thing is very good for me, and the routine of it all is very great. So like I have very specific schedules every day of the week, depending on whether it's matinee or early 7 o'clock show or Friday night show.
And what's in that day? It's like, oh, I go to the gym, or what are the things you fill your day with? Is there?
And in the last, Some Like It Hot was such a physical, like right out of the gate show, like so much tap dancing and so much running. But the challenge of it was that I had to eat 3 hours before the show, at least. And so the nice part of now being unemployed is I can eat dinner at 7:30, and that's the most exciting part of my life. Let's hear it for 7:30.
And then for the music department, like, just tell us about your day-to-day as you, when do you like, Annbritt, when do you get to the theater, or when do you like, what's your routine?
Well, let's start in the morning.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm married. My husband Charles is a music director. The last thing he did on Broadway was conducted Hugh Jackman and Seth Foster in Music Man. So just to let you know how we met, I was on the second National Miss Saigon tour, music director, and I needed an assistant, and my friend said, oh, you should have them hire Charles duChateau, he's perfect. And he was. That would be very wrong today, wouldn't it? But he says he's been working for me ever since. But he's an amazing cellist, jazz pianist, fantastic conductor. He's like, everybody loves him, right, Mike?
Absolutely.
He really is like the most liked guy on Broadway. We have 2 kids, 2 boys, so the day starts early. Well, not anymore, because they're both in college. So right now my life is pretty damn great, but for real, because, you know, get home we live north of Manhattan, up in Westchester, and get home at midnight, and people would have to be getting up at 6. So it's kind of, you know, you just do it. And then as music director, you frequently have rehearsals during the day.
Right.
Which,
For what? Say,
if you're the star, you show up for the show. But, you know, and I'm not saying that in any derogatory way.
You lazy piece of...
Oh, that's not how I meant. Okay, this is a moment where I want to say, like, he's the nicest guy. Like, everybody, I'm just going to derail for a second. Like, all these people, all these stars, they're the nicest normal people. Okay, not normal, but the nicest people. Seriously, like, you know, working with Christian Borle, like conducting Some Like It Hot for the first time, you know, it's, everybody else gets to have rehearsal and get thrown in, and like as conductor or subs, you know, you just do it. Could not be a more supportive, nicer person, as is Matt,
Thank you.
as is Abby Mueller, as I love Allie Stroker. I just have met her for the first time. Cheyenne, like, everything, Norm, oh my God, I got to do Les Mis with Norm for a year and a half. It's like a freaking dream. So, I mean, they all really are who they are on stage. It's what I wanted to say, you know.
That's right. Can I derail you for a second?
Wow.
What is it like to suddenly have the baton and play a big Broadway show for the first time? Obviously, you're prepared,
Yeah.
and you know it, but it's all on you. What is that feeling like?
Well, I was going to be funny and like very powerful, but I mean, but you're not thinking it is true, but you know, because you can derail a show. You know, if you're not like ready. I mean, I'm not. I don't know why. I've never been a nervous Nelly type. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Kind of like, well, how hard could it be? But that's kind of been that's my vibe. Now, there's people that get really terribly nervous doing it. I think it's all about, well, I started getting in my head for a second. I was a serious French horn player through college. So and my piano teacher had me do everything in college. She's like, you know what, you should go accompany the opera studio, and you should go help the choral conductor, and he made me conduct. And she made the studio I played for, she's like, I'm gonna give you voice lessons. So I randomly had absolutely everything in line to do what I'm doing today, with no intention of doing what I'm doing. You know what I mean? It was just one of those things where they like said, do everything, do everything. So like playing horn and like breathing with the singers, it's like all about pacing, and does Christian want it faster today? You know, sensing that. I'm not saying, you know what I'm saying. Like, because there's some days where it's like, hey, I'm feeling on top of the world and I want to hold that note forever. Or I'm not feeling great and let's just, help me. So there's a lot of just being in simpatico with your performers and keeping them happy. In many ways, just being there for people, both musically and whatever, personally.
Checking in before the show
Correct.
is a very big deal.
Yeah.
It's very sweet.
Yeah.
And Annbritt, you mentioned you would be in rehearsals during the day while the show is up and running. Where are you rehearsing? Are those new additions to the pit that Michael's brought in, or what? Same one?
Understudies.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Because you've got,
Because you have to rehearse all those understudies.
Mhm. And they have to be up to date all the time. And usually, every lead has 2 covers. So that's
Right.
everybody in the company.
Needs to be
So
rehearsed.
you're always, and it's fun, because it's different people and different takes and, their timing's gonna be a little bit different there, so it's all good. It's just, it's a lot of rehearsal. It's a lot of time.
And then Michael, I imagine you're juggling subs and when people, tell me what the day-to-day is for you.
For me, now is much different than when I was actively playing guitar on a Broadway show. When I knew Annbritt, but when we worked together we worked together on Frozen and on Broadway. So at that time, I was a music coordinator of many shows. At the same time, I was playing a show. So my day would start. I have a 12-year-old, so at the time he was, I'm thinking before COVID, so maybe he was 7 or 8, and I'd get up at 8 in the morning, and answer the, phone, emails, going all day until 5, and I'd be exhausted, like a, 9 to 5 job basically, and then I'd have to get in the car and fight traffic to go into town to play in more Broadway. So that was pretty exhausting. And then there's 2 show days, so the whole weekend was packed. So that was a very different experience, and when COVID happened, everything shut down. So then I finally found that my nights were free, and I hadn't been used to that. So now it's a very different, it's mostly a day job for me, and then I have my evenings to play at night, if I want, other gigs.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is all of yours pre-show ritual? And do you have one? What do you do? You get to, well, first of all, most of the time you get there half an hour, your call is half hour. Is it ever earlier? And if so, why?
I think sometimes people have wig calls, hair calls, fight calls, lip calls, all things to keep the cast safe or keep your character looking beautiful. It depends on the show. I mean, for Sinatra just doing that, I would get there about an hour and a half before and just have my alone time in my room, and that was the first time I ever really needed that kind of zoning in on the character and peace and quiet and making it meditative in that way. And then in the past, I really needed to be amped up for roles, so I'll do the gym right before I get there and make sure that I'm my adrenaline's really high and I feel, dropped into that. But it all really just depends on, I think, the character and what you're doing in the show, and the ritual changes. Mine usually involves some sort of meditation and some sort of fitness before the show.
What about for you?
It's a lot of coffee.
Oh yeah, and Celsius. I'm addicted to
yeah.
Celsius. It's a problem. Oh yeah.
I like to get there before half hour, and it's time to visit people and walk around and say hi, and that's part of the fun. And then just get really caffeinated. There's some shows, where you're, going right out of the gate. There are other shows where I've had 45 minutes at the top of the show to sit and read, which is luxurious. I miss that a lot. Not going up on say, Mama?
What depends? If I'm there for rehearsal, if you're there for rehearsal, then you have a couple hours before the show and you're already there. But I like to, if there's nothing before it, I'm usually there an hour before, and I'm the check-in person. I like to see how people are doing and take the pulse, and that's what I do.
And that's when you make decisions like, oh, we're going to do this a little faster tonight.
Yeah, usually though, well, yeah, it can be then, or it can be in the moment. It just depends.
how do you, what factors into that decision in the moment?
You can feel it. I mean, it's magic. You know, I mean, it's just, you just know. How do you verbalize that when, you know, I mean, when you're conducting something and somebody's going just a little bit faster than you, then you're like, oh yeah, okay, let's move it. Or if they want to, you know.
Ooh, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
How do you feel about click tracks? And can you describe what a click
Oh,
track
God,
is and why we
Christian.
use them? Wow. They're necessary sometimes, correct?
Yes.
You're just saying this because you know I'm going to go on a tangent. We only have 10 minutes left.
I want to hear it.
Okay. Personally, not a fan.
Yeah.
Not a fan of click track.
Can you describe what a click track is?
Click track is, you don't know what a click track is. So you will hit a button, trigger something, you'll wear an in-ear, and yeah, it's like a metronome.
Yeah.
And so it'll say, well, on Frozen, it was Kristen Lopez saying 3, 4, and then it would go. For certain things. Now, on Frozen, there was probably half the show was clicked because Frozen, because you got stuff flying and gloves flying and capes flying, and
So it's to keep everything
and it's to
coordinated,
keep
all
it's to keep sound effects, orchestra, music, sets flying,
Automation.
props, automation, everything coordinated. I get that. Groovy. Let's use click. If there's nothing happening, don't. Why do we need it? There's a you know. For me, it takes the heart out of the music when you just have to do it the same every single time. That's my own opinion.
Frustrating.
So, and it's, you know, it's not fun to conduct a show when you can't move it or, you know. Now, like, if you've got huge tap dance numbers and...
Or getting married today.
Yeah, well, you know, and I fear that people are relying on it. You know, I've had a music director say, well, we should just click the whole show because then the actor won't complain at us about the tempo. And I'm like, well, then just play it. I almost said record. Just play, you know. I'm like, that defeats the purpose for me. Is it supposed to be, you know, a joint, you know, making art, making music? And that only took 3 minutes. It was good.
It's intermission. What are you doing?
What are you doing?
I mean, really, it does depend on the show.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have a whole change that you have to make. Sometimes you
Yeah.
make up changes. Sometimes you just sit and... So they felt like shorter and shorter these days, I
Yeah.
have to say. 'Cause
I did Little Shop of Horrors too. And I'm sure you remember that Seymour does not have an intermission. He goes downstairs and he changes his costume and he's dripping with sweat and then he runs back upstairs. We all shared a dressing room. I didn't get to do it with Christian, unfortunately, sadly. But yeah, there's sometimes you have no intermission because of that and you're still working through it. Other times it's like, no one talk to me right now, you know, like it's your one moment of quiet and you just kind of zone out, but it changes show to show.
Also for the audiences, I know in this day and age, like a big part of the experience is concessions. And like using intermission to go to the bathroom, there's always a line, and then you want to get that very expensive sippy cup of whatever it is.
Of a shot of vodka.
Just know that when you are dilly-dallying, that we've been called to places and we're standing on stage. And I was the bane of the stage manager's existence on Little Shop because I would just go, I'm ready! And I was like, what? We've been standing here for 7 minutes. They're like, the house. The house. No, we're waiting on you.
The New Amsterdam has approximately 75 restrooms for the ladies. It's amazing.
Annbritt, what are you doing during intermission?
I am running to the restroom and I'm filling my water bottle.
Yes.
That's it.
And And then, Michael, how often do you stop by the theater? Tell me about like kind of what your day-to-day is there.
I live about 45 minutes from the city, and I don't, the work I do I can do remotely, but when I have a show opening up or in tech or in rehearsals, I'll come into town every day. And then when I pair going into town on checking in on some of the other shows. So if it's a Wednesday, I'll, spend the whole day in the city, and then I'll pop in, or sometimes I'll pop in at intermission and check in on some of the shows I'm working on. So yeah, I do check in, especially long-running shows, coming in every month or so just to check in. Of course, sometimes there's things to address where I'll have to come in, but yeah.
I have a question. Can I ask a question of my piece? One of the most fascinating things that I didn't know before working on Broadway was, you're talking about understudies. Like, understudies in a cast are set and cast, and it is. But in the pit, can you talk about the process of subbing and who chooses the subs? And maybe how many shows you might be rehearsing at any given time?
That's great. So, subbing is, like Annbritt alluded to earlier, you have to be on. You get the music, so you get one chance. So you'll get, like back in the day when I was subbing, and I was introduced to the Lion King guitar player, I sat in the pit and there was no headphones, no click, no conductor cam video that the person could send to you so you could practice at home. Like, I had to watch the conductor. I had a little tape recorder and I taped his guitar, so I just had the ambient audio of the guitar, and he handed me the music and he said, go to Staples and copy this. And I was like, is this the book? He was like, yeah, that's the only copy, so be careful. So I brought it, I copied it, and then I went home and I just practiced like my life depended on it, because I was like, I'll never get called again. Like, this is New York and this is the Lion King. So, you get one chance, and like you play and it's great. You say, okay, he or she can come back, or not, and if something happened, maybe it's, well, there was one or two things we can go over, and the music director will have some notes, and then the next time they come in, they go over them, and but who chooses the subs? Usually the shareholder will, me as a music coordinator, asks for a list of up to 5 players during the orchestra rehearsal process, and sometimes there's someone on the list, I'll say no. Or the music director will say no, or maybe the music director says, I would like, this person to be a sub on your list. I know them from another show and that they would be great. So it's a little bit of a collaboration. You get the names, and these are the people that learn the show and come in and sink or swim,
Do you feel pressure as the chairholder for the sub that you've chosen, and do you think about them when you're off doing things like,
Oh, yes. Yes.
I just brought in somebody for Key 1 at Aladdin, and if you know A Whole New World, that arrangement is extremely exposed. There's no hook, there's no pattern, there's no nothing. You just gotta learn it, and you gotta nail it.
Mm-hmm. Subbing is the hardest, actually.
It is.
I think it's way harder, because as a chairholder, you have time to live with it, and in rehearsals, no one's there. I mean, you're learning the music. You have a chance to really put your stamp on it, or really hear the notes and see as the show develops, what are the things about the show. But as a sub, the show's been running, and sometimes these long-running shows, you're amongst other people who don't want to hear your take on the show.
We've got just a couple of minutes, and we've talked a lot about all the things you love about being a Broadway show. What do you love about the times when you are not in a Broadway show? Christian has given us one tidbit about his later dinner time, but what do you enjoy about the time when you are not bound to that sort of rehearsal 8-show week schedule?
Oh, the ability to spend time with family and friends. I mean, you miss a lot of things like weddings and birthdays and Easters and things like, my grandparents always talk about how they never see me, and that's because of the schedule. And I think whenever I'm out of it, that's when I try to catch up on that as much as I can, and do weekend trips and reconnect with everyone that I've abandoned completely. That's the biggest thing. I mean, you sacrifice a lot when you're doing 8 shows a week.
Yeah. What about for you, Christian?
I was saying, the holidays too are very hard. It's nice to have holidays, because that's when our schedule gets even harder, because we want to take advantage of all the people who want to see a show on the holidays, which is great. But yeah, it's lovely to have personal time.
It's ditto. I'm going to say something, maybe, I don't know if it's controversial, but when COVID hit, it was terribly scary, but we were all in the same boat. So it kind of felt like, well, there's nothing we can do. Like, legit. So it wasn't like your show closed, but your friend still had a show. It was nobody had a show. But it was the first time as parents that my husband and I were running out of the house at 5 o'clock to go downtown, and we'd have dinner together as a family Sunday and Monday. It was, evening show and dark day. So we got to have dinner with our kids every single day. And it got to be May, it was mid-May, and my husband said, oh God, like, do you think they're sick of us? And so we told the boys, we're like, you don't have to do it every day. And like, if you want to go eat downstairs or whatever, and one of my sons was like, do you not want to eat with us? So, like, it was a huge, as hard as it was professionally, like, we'll never get that again. You know what I mean? I mean, it's the family time. It's the, special.
Yeah, for sure. Same here. All of those things. I mean, in between shows when I was playing on Broadway, kind of enjoying the time to have, to not have an 8 shows a week schedule, not having to race into town, being home at night, all those things. And if you're a regular chairholder, you can also sub out and choose. That is a benefit that musicians, that maybe some actors don't have, where you can just be out. I don't feel like coming in this weekend, and you're covered. I mean, you don't get paid when you're not there. But
What percentage can you sub out? But for real, like, you have a great union. What percentage are you?
Well, I wouldn't say it's great, but you have to be there 50% of the time.
Hold on.
It's 302.
So back in the day, I'll say, I first got to New York in the year 2000. And back then, there were a lot of other things happening. And over the years, it has changed. And I really don't know anybody that takes up, like,
The people where you're like,
people
they're never
covet a
there.
Broadway job.
Yeah. When you say that person's never there, and I do the math, it's like 85%. Like, you have to really never be there, and you don't get paid. And also, someone that's there 100% of the time, which is rare, doesn't have, there are subs. There's a long list of 20, 25 other musicians that are looking for work that won't have an in like I did because they weren't able to sub. So there's a balance of that too.
Another thing you can do when you're not on a Broadway show is go on the Broadway Cruise. So thank you.
Thank you.